Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well. In this video, we're going to try our best to cover the chart of a market, which we mentioned in the past, but we haven't covered for some time, and that is the chart of silver, which, by the way, as you can see here, has exploded higher, especially in the last several months. So we'll have a look at this particular chart and what it potentially means for silver, and also this particular chart you're seeing here. Indeed, we'll have a look at what are the odds of silver potentially reaching the next key important levels, and also this particular chart on the daily time frame, and what this potentially means for silver as well. All right, guys, join me. All right, guys, welcome back. So in a few minutes, I'm going to cover this particular chart of silver and also this longer time frame chart, as well as this particular chart here that you see here, which is showing some very interesting things about this particular metal. So before we go on to that, though, I want to first of all mention about what I've been saying about silver, especially in the last couple of years. So let's take a look at those videos, we'll come back. So my own personal view, as I mentioned pretty much in this video, is that I still think, even at the prices silver is right now, I still think it's quite undervalued and relatively cheap. Again, relative certainly to most other major markets. So personally, if I see another pullback, another major correction in silver, I'll still continue to load up on the metal, on the precious metal. And I personally think we have much higher levels to come on silver in the next few years. I think in the longer term, silver could test the prior highs it saw in 2011, near the 45.50 region there on the chart. As you can see, that was the prior high in 2011 at about the $49.50 region. And I think we could go to those levels and perhaps take those levels out.
The trend line here, we got the trend line break this year, earlier on this year. And we also broke through this historic $26 horizontal level as well. It's very much in a bullish formation overall in the monthly chart. I just want to highlight that overall it's a bullish pattern. So coming down to the daily charts, over the last week or couple of weeks, it's pulled back, but I think it's pulling back into a good overall zone. Could it pull back some more? Yeah, because if we come back to the monthly allows for it to pull back further, back down to maybe the 27.50 to 28 area. But whatever way we slice it, it's just pulling back within the context of an overall upwards trend.
All right, guys, as you saw from those videos from 2023 and also 2024, the video I did with my good friend Charlie Burton. So we were both bullish, as you saw. So we were both expecting silver to go higher. And as a matter of fact, silver here has managed to follow through with our expectations and moved higher. And in fact, you can see that it's not that far away right now. This is the monthly chart of silver. So you can see from the highs of 2011 to the lows we had here in 2020. And indeed, this most recent rally we're seeing here, we're not that far away from the 78.6% Fibonacci retracement level, which is a 41.6. And also, we're not that far away, as you can see here, from the all-time highs of 2011. But the question you're probably wondering is, okay, now silver has seen a lot of strength recently, as we're seeing here, from the daily time frame chart, and also this particular chart you're seeing here as well. But is this rally and this blasting higher just going to continue relentlessly without some kind of a pullback? Or could we first see some kind of a correction or pullback before we continue going higher? Well, the first thing I want to bring to your attention is this. First of all, notice that silver is seeing negative divergence on this daily time frame chart. So we can see even though that silver has made this higher high, but notice the MACD. The MACD is making a lower high, which is a warning sign, which means that if silver were now to break support, it could be a sign that we might see a correction or pullback, because divergences or negative divergences, when they occur, they're typically signs of a weakening momentum and potentially a weakening of the strength of this uptrend. Okay. So, by the way, I would like to see first support break before we see a correction, and that support level is here at 37.5. So even though we have a negative divergence, by itself, that's not enough to bring about a correction or pullback. We also need to combine that with a break of support, which on silver is 37.5 at a minimum, before we then see a correction or pullback to the next key support levels. Before we come into this, by the way, let me also mention this. This is the weekly chart of silver, and I've superimposed in this particular chart our own LT regression channel. And what this particular indicator does is, going back to 2023, it shows the 2 standard, 3 standard, and 4 standard deviation levels. So you can see the silver has been rallying higher here. Okay, that's the rally in silver, as you see there. But notice, first it reached the 2 standard deviation of this channel of this regression channel, and then follow through higher and hit the 3 standard deviation, which, by the way, is a warning sign that silver is getting overstretched and extremely overbought. For example, if you look over here, in the past, when silver has reached the 3 standard deviation channel here back in the year 2024, and also in late 2024, notice what happened each time. Each time it hit the green line, it then had a pullback, a correction, back towards the 21 weekly moving average. Same again here, as you can see, hit the 3 standard deviation level and then pulled back to the averages and even lower still. Okay, and we're seeing something very similar again this year in 2025. So we're seeing silver hitting that 3 standard deviation channel, and based on the divergences we're seeing on the lower time frame on the daily chart, that does increase the likelihood and probability of some kind of a correction or pullback. Likely, I mean, we might actually see a pullback and correction once we break down below 37.5. It could increase the probability of a pullback down, potentially towards this weekly 21 moving average here, which is slowly catching up with the price in the region of approximately 36 to about 35, as we can see here. And by the way, that I think is quite likely in my view. Now, of course, there are situations when this market, again, silver, because it's very volatile, it could potentially push even higher. Sometimes the market does surprise us. It is, in my view, unlikely. I think it's less likely. So personally, I think it's more likely for silver to put in some kind of a correction or pullback based on extreme overbought, overstretched conditions we can see on the chart. But if silver does not see an immediate pullback and instead blasts higher, the next resistance, in my view, would be at the 4 standard deviation level, this magenta line here. Now, I'm not saying this was going to happen. Okay. Personally, I think that the odds are higher for a pullback and a correction on silver in the near term, in the next several weeks. But if silver does not make a correction or pullback soon, and instead makes another push higher, then the next resistance, the level which it may hold and then start a pullback, could be at this upper magenta line here, which approximately would be in the region of 40 to 40.5. Okay. In other words, it would be in this region between 40 to 40.5. As the next potential level of resistance where it may then start a major pullback and correction. Okay, so let's see what happens. But personally, in my view, I think given the extremely overextended conditions we see here on this chart, again, based on the fact that it's hit the upper 3 standard deviation level, and given the fact that usually when this occurs, again, as we've seen in the past, we see a correction or pullback. And also, as we can see here on this daily chart, as I mentioned earlier, we have a negative divergence on the chart on this daily time frame, also a warning sign of a potential correction or pullback, and also on this chart, on this monthly chart. And here's why that's important. If I just zoom in here a little bit, you will see that on the RSI, this is the RSI 14 setting on the monthly chart. So the RSI 14 setting on the monthly chart, we are now overbought. And as the month of July is coming to a close very soon, then this potentially is a strong warning signal that indeed silver is extremely overbought, overstretched as we've seen. And you can see the last time this occurred in the year 2020, when the RSI became extremely overbought here. You can see what happened pretty much soon afterwards. It then started a correction and pullback. At a very minimum, it made a pullback here on the monthly chart. So again, a very interesting situation. And again, I think that the higher probability is that silver being overstretched, overbought, it's quite likely, as we've seen also from this chart here as well, the odds are quite high for an intermediate pullback and correction, some kind of reversion back to the mean. So that's what I'm looking for, a reversion to the mean. Don't get me wrong here. Long term, I still remain bullish and positive on silver. So I think in the longer term, I'm looking for silver to eventually continue higher, the uptrend, to much higher levels. So, for example, I think that silver eventually is going to move towards its 2011 highs. So, for example, the next resistance is going to be here at the 78.6% retracement, 41.6. So I think it's quite probable that in the next several months, perhaps by the end of this year, silver will be higher. Again, potentially and probably. The first target would be here after a pullback, by the way. Again, I'm looking for silver eventually to move to this level after some kind of a pullback and correction. Okay. But eventually, in the longer term, perhaps by next year, I think silver could be at these highs, above the all-time highs of 2011. By no means a certainty. Let me just make sure I mention this, that this is by no means guaranteed. But given that we're in an uptrend, and as long as silver maintains itself, I would say as long as silver remains above 30, this key support, approximately 30 or 28, I'm still looking eventually for silver to move higher, towards the all-time highs, okay, towards the prior highs that we had in 2011. And indeed, potentially even higher than that in the longer term. Again, not this year probably, but likely next year we could reach those upper levels, as long as silver remains above that support. All right, guys, so that's really what I have here on the chart of silver. Nothing much more to add. I think in the short term, in the medium term, in the next several weeks, some kind of a pullback, a correction, likely down to the region of, for example, the 21 weekly moving average. We're just slowly catching up with the price. I think is quite likely. And I think on the daily chart, we can see that level more clearly. I think on the daily chart, given the divergence we're seeing here as well in the MACD, some kind of a pullback down to the region of 36.5 to 35 or 35.3 is probable, down to this range. That's what I'm looking for. A pullback, a correction down to the support level between 36.5 to 35.3 or 35 region here. And as long as those levels hold and we see an impulsive bounce from those levels, then I think the uptrend to much higher levels could continue in the longer term. So short term, I think some caution is required because of the risks of a potential pullback and correction. But in the longer term, I think we could see likely the uptrend continue to much higher levels. So I'm remaining bullish on that. Thank you very much indeed. Bye for now.